so I know it very well.
Yeah, that's a long time. All right. Okay, there we go. We are live. Suppose we can start.
Okay.
All right, good evening, Maneru Ndimadekwana, and welcome to everybody who managed to join us on this particular edition of Live Chats on Monday. As you know, of course, we have this every Monday, 6:30, just for 30 minutes, with an interesting person, talk about interesting things and see what perspectives we can glean from them, and of course, how we can gain from all that we hear from there. But otherwise, today is our last episode for the season 2. We've had a great run. I think this is the 13th or 14th episode we're having. Wonderful time to have had you guys. Good guests we've had. And tonight we have a show-closing, show-stopping guest in none other than Mr. Trevor Ncube. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. And a great pleasure to be here. And thank you for having me.
Right, thank you for really gracing us with your time and your presence. I know for people who are probably wondering, who is this man? Trevor is one of those journalists who has seen it all. He's seen the typewriter, he's seen Obama become president, he's been there, done that. But currently, of course, professionally, he's the chairman of Alpha Media Holdings in Zimbabwe, which prints the Zimbabwe Independent. They print, the Standard, that paper that comes out every Sunday, the Newsday on a daily basis. He's a multiple award-winning editor. Man, he's got, if I could list the number of awards, I think it would take us the whole show, 30 minutes that we've dedicated for this particular time. So let me not do that. But Trevor, interestingly, also hosts his own show, In Conversation with Trevor, which I haven't been able to get an invite to. That's why I thought I should invite him to my show, rather, so I can at least feature with the men. But that's Trevor Ncube in a nutshell. Welcome again, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Right, so media, sir, you've been in the industry forever and a day. From the late 90s, I probably was running around in my nappies when you started out. And still to this day, you're literally part of the cornerstone of Zimbabwean media freedom, I can say, if I can put it like that. What really inspired you to jump from the educational sector that you were back in the day to find yourself in the media space where you are currently today?
Again, thank you for having me. It's very easy. It would be very easy for me to sit here and say, I planned it. This is what I did, and then I did that, and I always thought about doing it. But that's, the answer to your question really is, it's by God's grace. I went into. I'm an accidental journalist, if you want to put it that way. But it's now clear to me, ever since I started on this journey some 28 years ago, that this is what God wanted me to do. I got into it accidentally. To cut a long story short, I was a member of the Zimbabwe Economic Society, went to a conference and spoke a lot. I tend to speak too much when I'm in conferences, and the conference organizers and my colleagues at the Zimbabwe Economic Society and ZBC decided that they wanted to have a series on Zimbabwe's economy. And they didn't have an anchor person. And so they said, Trevor, we're watching you throughout the conference. We think you can be our anchor person. I had never in my life anchored anything or written an article for publication. And I said, guys, I can't do this. But my colleagues insisted. And one of those colleagues was Nigel Chanakira. And I ended up hosting a 16-week program on ZBC, ZTV, without any experience. It was during my hosting of that show that the proprietors of the Financial Gazette spotted me. So they basically headhunted me. They came looking for me when I was a teaching assistant at the University of Zimbabwe. And they said, we've bought the Financial Gazette. We have a current editor, Clive Wilson. We want you to come in and understudy Clive Wilson. Again, I'd never been a journalist in my life, never trained as a journalist in my life. And November 1989, I became assistant editor at the Financial Gazette. And that's how my journalism journey started. Never trained, never went to journalism school, spotted at a conference, and headhunted by the owners of the Financial Gazette.
That's quite the story. And I'm actually thinking, for people who are sitting and listening out there watching and probably thinking, you know what, I talk too much. They could probably be saying, oh, okay, there's hope for us after all, you know, in getting the big breaks in life. Now, that time when you got headhunted, I think it was literally round about the time that the Willowgate scandal was really heating up in Zim, and government was rattled and shackling, and things were not really, what can I say, kosher between the political establishment and the media, of course, the independent and private media at the time. When they gave you that call and they said, Mr. Ncube, we really want you to come over to this side and do this work for us, wasn't there some trepidation in your heart thinking, is this a not so dangerous thing for me to do now, to be jumping into a media industry that's really going head on and exposing this massive government program of corruption that could potentially then endanger your own life? Wasn't it something that you could potentially put consideration to and try to stay and shy away from?
Not at all. That was the list of my concerns, list of my considerations. Actually, I was so excited about being approached to be assistant editor with the promise that I could succeed the then editor, Clive Murphy, that I was busy plotting. I remember I was making notes in terms of how I was going to change the Financial Gazette and where I was going to change it. I had been a teaching assistant in the history of socialism at the economic history department. So you can imagine I was a leftist, and I was being hired to come and edit the Financial Gazette, the preeminent business and financial and economic newspaper in the country. And as far as I was concerned, the thing that was top on my mind is, how am I going to change this newspaper into a left-leaning newspaper? I mean, as it goes, you know, the paper changed me. I wasn't able to change it. Clearly, it was set in its ways as a capitalist business economic publication. So I mean, my safety, my going head to head with the government was the least of my concerns. I was so excited as a young person, 30 something. What am I going to do to change this publication?
And I think regarding your safety, just general, I think you probably have somewhat of an affinity for danger and being closed out, because I think just in looking at the reporting that the Financial Gazette did over that period when really media freedom was not so free in Zim, and looking, of course, then later on to the the Zimbabwe Independent, the Standard, just generally the standard of expose and not literally taking sides, as it were, in trying to present the facts as they were to the public. I think this ended up at some point in time getting your passport even confiscated. In fact, I just saw recently that you were also blacklisted at the SABC again for quite the bit. So I'm thinking it's not just a Zim thing. Across borders, you were literally rattling cages and causing trouble. How did all of that not play into the psyche of, you know what, I potentially could have, in the safety of my academic sphere, for my family's sake, for my sanity's sake, potentially I could rather be doing better than being banned on public stations and being chased away from my own home country? How does that play around, you know, to get you to where you are?
You know, when you are doing what you've been called to do, predestined to do, as I believe I have in the jobs that I have, you know, your security and your safety are not the things that are paramount to you. I was just doing my job. You know, I often say that the public's response, or the government's response to what I was doing, made me look like I was a brave person. But what people don't realize is that I'm a coward, actually. But the thing with coming for cowards is that at some point they stop running. and they face whatever is coming their way. So I've never done any of this stuff in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, as a proprietor of the MNG. Never did any of this stuff because, either I wanted to win awards, or wanted to make a name for myself. It was, in the first instance as editor, just editing the paper the best way that I saw fit. What were the issues that were being presented to us by our sources? What were the issues that were preeminent at that time as far as the societies in which we were operating in were concerned? In Zimbabwe, it was people who were against the one-party state, against corruption, against abuse of human rights, democracy, accountability. Those were the things that we were pursuing: transparency and accountability as far as the management of public resources are concerned. And in South Africa, similarly, as a proprietor for 15 years of the Mail and Garden, essentially providing the space for the journalists to practice their journalism as freely, as fair as possible. And that irritates some people who think that you should be contained, who think that there should be certain things that proprietors of publications should not allow to happen. So at the end of the day, I say to people, and this cannot be contested, that the newspapers I own, whether in South Africa or in Zimbabwe, radio, tele-radio that we own in Zimbabwe, I have no editorial input. What I do is to appoint professional people to run all the media assets that we have. And after that, what I do is to ensure to the best of our ability that they have the resources that they need to operate. And the editors, the journalists make the calls on the issues that they deal with on a day-to-day basis. Having been a journalist myself, I know what it is like to have a proprietor who is looking over your shoulder and telling you what you should write and what you should not write. So I keep away from the newsroom as much as possible. My responsibility is to appoint the CEO. My responsibility is to appoint the editor-in-chief in line with my values and principles. And that's where it ends. How governments react is beyond my control.
Most of the time, when government does react, they always say, especially of course when your big exposés do come through from some of your titles, that you have a profit agenda. You've got to pay the bill somehow, so you must therefore cook up some scandals to sell your papers, that you may then be sustainable as a business in the long term. Now, obviously, at some point in time, as a previous journalist as well, you'd know that there are times where you'll have to make that call when the stories are there. You juxtapose 2, 3, 4, 5 stories that you potentially can run as a headline. And given, of course, then the considerations that there is, unfortunately, that financial aspect that you also have to look into, could we then say there's some truth to what governments respond when they respond to you, to say you were trying to actually scandalize to make money? Is it something that you've seen live happening potentially in your career as a journalist?
Absolutely not. No, not in any of the publications that I've been involved in. I mean, first of all, as a journalist, I went for stories that cost us business because advertisers pulled out the advertising after we did the stories. Point number one. Point number 10, point number 2, rather, as a proprietor, rather as an editor, I've made calls about stories, for instance, concerning banks, concerning the government that have lost us advertising. But we might lose advertising. What we get at the end of the day is public respect. When the public sees that we are consistent in the calls that we make, that the profit motive is not the leading thing, but where is the story leading us? That's the most fundamental thing. The one thing, Ronald, that I operate by, I've got something that is called why we do what we do. That's my roadmap. That's my core value proposition to the people that I work with. Why do we do what we do? And if anything, if any story lines up with why we do what we do, it will be published. When I was editor, as chairman, I'm a bit far removed from the newsroom. All that is important for us is that document lives in the newsroom. And why do we do what we do? We do what we do in Zimbabwe, for instance, to ensure that democracy is safe, to ensure that our publications enable as many voices as possible to be expressed, those that are pro the government, anti-government, those that are pro the opposition and anti-opposition. We want to see ourselves as the mirror for society and the mirror that through which society sees itself. So if you are clear about those values and those value propositions and the principles, the profit motive is something that comes as a result of people respecting what you're doing, corporates respecting what you're doing, government respecting what you're doing. As I sit with you right now, I mean, government is a big advertiser in our titles. ZANU-PF is a big advertiser in our titles because they realize that even though they accuse us of, oh, Trevor who's doing this and so forth, in the bottom of their hearts, they know the truth. And that truth is the editors and journalists who make that call, not me. Point number one. Point number two, that as a result of those independent calls by the journalists and the editors, we have eyeballs. We have a huge following. And they want that huge following. They want that credibility. So at the end of the day, for us as journalists and as a media house, our currency is truth. Our currency is being reliable. Our currency is being dependable. Our currency is being, to fact checked all the time. And if we do that consistently, the public will rally around you and you will be able to make some money.
I think that's a very brilliant response, actually. Thank you. I hope it's not a diplomatic one trying to cover over the real issue. But there's the issue, sir, which I think brings us pretty much here tonight, that relationship, therefore, between government and the media, and the role, therefore, that the media must play in ensuring that, like you say, it safeguards the democracy of the different countries that you operate in as a newspaper, as a proprietor yourself, but generally media in general across the continent. Now, Africa is not really known for being the most free environment to work in for media people. I think we've got our Namibias, our South Africas, our Ghanas on the one end of the spectrum, where really freedom is relatively good, versus, of course, our Nigerias, our Somalias, and Zimbabwe's on the other side, where things are really tough for journalists. Is where you find yourself? You find yourself in one of the toughest media environments to work in, being Zim, where journalists really, with the polarization is one thing, but the safety, therefore, of the independent media journalists is somewhat in question at the moment. How do we continually become effective in telling that truthful story, and yet knowing that there's potentially something that could happen, therefore, to us or our families in a time such as like that? How do we move away from that fear, in terms of our journalistic ethics, and try and report the thing as it is without that sword hanging over our head just in case, there's the C10 following me, there's that person, etc., etc. How do we do that effectively, sir?
Well, that your question surprises me, because I think the bravest people that I've come across in my life, whether it be in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, or Kenya, where we had MNG Africa, are journalists. They are very brave. I have never come across any of them that, the fear is a consideration, the intimidation is a consideration. It's part of the terrain that they operate in, and they go for stories regardless of whether there are threats or not. So it's really not a consideration. I cannot remember. It's something that happens when you've written the story, when you've realized the way people react, and then you're like, well, okay, why are they reacting the way they do? But I think it's important that we as journalists take ourselves seriously, take our work seriously. If the public and the politicians and the business executives are to take us seriously, we ourselves need to take ourselves seriously. We need to prioritize our professionalism, our values, our norms, the way that we operate. We need to carry ourselves around like professional people, which unfortunately is not always the case with a lot of journalists. There's a number of instances across the continent where you hear of checkbook journalism, where we compromise ourselves as a profession. It's that compromising ourselves as a profession that compromises the way that we do our work. So I think you're right. There is a sword that's hanging over journalists in Zimbabwe, all across the continent. But what I want to emphasize is that it's never a huge consideration as you're writing a story, as you own a publication, as you're an editor, that, oh, they're going to do this and so forth. No. What I actually found, Ronald, is that in my position as editor, I would sometimes end up saying to guys, come on, slow down, guys, slow down, don't go that far. Journalists are very brave. They want to go for where the story is. They don't care about the consequences. So, and this is a gift to society, the fact that we've got these brave women and men prepared to go where the truth is. The unfortunate thing that is not always the case, that the public realizes the importance and the value of media and journalists in a democracy. That in any society where journalism is compromised, journalism is threatened, democracy is threatened. The voice of the public is threatened. Journalists exist not just for themselves, they exist for the sake of democracy, they exist for the sake of ensuring that the public is informed. So there are synergies between the interest of the public and the interest of journalists. That's a point, I think, for me, that is worth emphasizing.
Now, you've seen successive governments, you've been running papers from one government to another, both on this side of the Limpopo and on the other side. You've been there, done that, dabbled with this politician, sat and had coffee with this one, argued with the other one. You've seen it all. And in that, how do you then think it can then benefit the other journalists who are not in your stable, not in your organization, to try and maintain that same level of integrity in terms of the reporting, without resorting to what you mentioned earlier, checkbook journalism, or that journalism that's driven by state agendas, if we can call it that. Is that even possible? Is it something that they should aspire to? Can they do it given the environment that you find themselves in at the moment?
Absolutely, it can be done. I mean, I've been doing this now for over 25 years. I think I'll go back to what I said, which is we need to take ourselves seriously as journalists before we can expect anybody else to take ourselves seriously. Longevity is important, but longevity in our career is determined by what you do now. It's determined by the calls that you make in terms of being reliable, being trusted by the public, being trusted by politicians too, being trusted by business people, and understanding that you are in this game for the long term. There's no point to be gained. There's no profit to be made by making decisions that are based on short-term issues. Longevity is important, but much more importantly, each journalist has a brand name that they ought to be concerned about. And whatever you're doing, you must remember that it's going to follow you wherever you go. And if you care about your brand, your name, and your reputation, you'll stay away from checkbook journalism. You'll stay away from brown envelope journalism. You'll try and be a person of integrity, a woman, a man of integrity within the profession. What does that mean? That means as far as it is possible and within your power to be open to all sides in the political space, in the business space. You don't have to deliberately go out to create enemies. But when people decide that you are their enemy, there's nothing that you can do about that. But it's important to stay the course in being balanced, in being truthful, in being objective as much as possible, in taking one side. I say to people, journalists should only take one side. It's the side of the truth. the side of the facts. It doesn't matter. What I've realized is, I mean, when I started in 1989, I was perhaps one of the few people that went against Robert Mugabe. People thought I was crazy. People would come to me and say, "Why are you doing this? You must be crazy." 10 years down the line, the same people that were saying I'm crazy were saying, "We should have listened to you 10 years ago. Look at where we are." That's what the journalists should be doing. We have a role of leadership as journalists. We have a role of leadership. And that role of leadership comes from the fact that once the world is busy running around doing whatever they're doing, what we're doing is watching the crystal ball. What we're doing is reading the tea leaves, as it were, making analysis and so forth. So we can provide leadership to society if we stay true to the facts. And that's a role that most of us don't realize that we have. And if we stay the course as far as that role is concerned, credibility, integrity comes our way, and politicians, whether they like you or they don't like you, they'll pick up the phone and call you because they realize you are an asset and not a liability. We are, at the end of the day, part of nation building. It doesn't matter where we are. We are not enemies of the state. We are partners with governments, with business in nation building. That's how we ought to be viewed.
How you ought to be viewed, you put it succinctly there, but unfortunately, of course, I think the media fraternity is generally viewed with suspicious eyes, especially from the people that are in government, because of the exposés that you run every now and again, especially particularly yourself. I'm sure you've seen yourself on the other side of being called the enemy, not a few times, to the extent of losing your passport, like we mentioned earlier. Now, I want to really put you on the spot here and say, you know the role of democracy, you know the role that the media has to play. You've kind of laid it out for us in no uncertain terms, you know, in terms of the safeguarding of democracy and ensuring that, you know, you fight for the truth and you fight for that dignity of telling the story as it is. Now, when you look at yourself and when you look at your own personal legacy, if we were to call it that, let's say God is about to ring your number, dial your number and say, "Hey, Trevor, hey, it's time to come home." Do you think you have played that part yourself, sir, with your titles, with your writing, with your editing? Do you think you have made that contribution to safeguarding journalism in both South Africa and Zimbabwe through your papers and your editorial content?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very proud of what God has blessed me with, to be able to play the role that I've played in two important countries on the continent, in Africa, in Zimbabwe and South Africa. I mean, South Africa owning perhaps one of the most influential newspapers in the country, the Mail and Guardian, which we took to Kenya, headquartered in Nairobi. In Zimbabwe, with the influence that we have, we're the largest independent publisher in Zimbabwe, and we have been we occupy the front seat in the history that is being written in Zimbabwe about this country. We occupy the front seat in South Africa. Am I perfect? Absolutely not. I'm not perfect. Have I made mistakes? Absolutely, I have made mistakes. Have we made mistakes as the MNG, as Alpha Media holding titles? Absolutely, we have made mistakes because we are human. But yes, indeed, if God was to call me, and I cannot keep any secrets from my God, my Creator, I would be. It's a call that I would answer quite proudly and say, "Yes, sir, I am here. I'm ready to go. I've done what you sent me to do down here, and I'll be so much at peace."
That's good to hear. And the conviction with which you speak with, you know, you can see that you're not searching for words. You're not trying to grasp at something there. As a last word, you know, that you want to leave, I want to find out from you what your thoughts are in terms of where we are now, in terms of our media freedom across the continent. Is it something that we find ourselves at a place where it really can enhance the democratic experiment, or are we really just, you know, with the internet shutdown happening in Swaziland today, you know, coup happening in Sudan tomorrow, and then they close down the airwaves? Are we getting it right, or really is there a long way to go, perhaps, you think, in terms of really getting this media freedom right across this continent of ours?
You know, I am very critical of our profession. I've watched our profession over the past 25 years, seen journalists that came before me, Percy Koboza in South Africa, and many others, William Sarura in Zimbabwe, and many others. Amazing pedigree of journalists that were proud of the work that they were doing. I'm afraid that we now have a crop of journalists that don't come from the same material that Percy Koboza and William Sarura came from. I'm afraid that we have young women and men who don't realize that the responsibility that they have from society is huge, who take lightly the responsibility of being purveyors of information to the public. I fear we've been compromised. I fear social media has taken away a lot of good in a lot of journalists. So I fear we've become part of the problem. We have become part of the purveyors of falsehoods. We have not done much to earn the trust of the public, and hence, in certain instances, the public don't see us as in the same game as it were. So I'm very critical about where we are right now. I think the young generation don't appreciate just how important it is to be a journalist, how important it is to take time to research, to read, to acquaint yourself with the story that you're writing before. I think we've become lazy people. I think we've become lazy journalists. So I want us to look at ourselves before we blame the politicians. I want us to look at ourselves before we blame the environment, because most of what is, not most really, but some of what is coming to us, we have invited it upon ourselves by the way that we conduct ourselves. That being the case, it doesn't mean that I'm absolving the politicians for the abuses that they're visiting on journalism. But I want us to look ourselves in the mirror as professional women and men and say, are we doing this the right way? And I'm afraid that I'm very critical, and I think that we could do far much better. And I would end by saying, if we don't take ourselves seriously, we shouldn't expect politicians to take ourselves seriously.
And with that, we really come to the end of our program. Thank you for really gracing us with your presence and the wisdom that you gave. Whoa!
Is that rain?
Yes.
Wow, beautiful.
Looks like it's tracked next to my house or something. Sure. Anyway, thank you for gracing us with your time, sir. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, and with all the work that you have to do, that you've done thus far, we must commend you. I really am a big fan, and I know, of course, like you say, from knowing where you stand in terms of the truth and integrity, really just also exudes and comes out in your work. So it's not questionable, really, about the stance that you find yourself in. So really, thank you for being who you are and for giving us the news as it is over the years. My two dads, they've all gone to heaven now. We're really big fans as well, and I'm sure they would have loved to watch this interview tonight. But keep what you're doing, keep doing what you're doing, and ensuring, of course, that we know the truth, despite, like you said, what might happen, the consequences thereof.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity. Much appreciated.
Thank you, sir. For everybody who's watching out there, thank you very much for taking your time. It's good to have you here for the final episode, like I said, of our season 2 of Live Chats on Monday. We'll be catching up with you again next year, but until then, keep well, stay blessed, and hope to see you soon again. Righty. Adios.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Okay, where's that live stream?